The black smoke. In the early 1980s, during my third year of living in New York City's Lower East Side, I sold all of my possessions and bought a backpack and other survival gear, including a sleeping bag. After that, I had a little over $200 left from my transactions. I put it in my pocket, pulled on my new hiking boots, strapped on my pack, and dispatched myself toward the Holland Tunnel, planning to leave town and never come back. On the way, I changed the direction and went to the top of the Empire State Building to say a silent farewell to the city. But while up there, I decided that I really had to know where to go, and that although I had not yet had my own apartment in the city, I already had everything a person could want right there below me. So I went back to my neighborhood and sat on a stoop on St. Mark's Place near 2nd Avenue, feeling content with no further plans at all. I might have stayed right there until the sidewalks cracked, but soon an old car rattled up and stopped. I hadn't known that an acquaintance of mine named Susan had such a contraption, but there she was driving it. Susan hopped out and frantically asked me where I was going. I told her that I was going nowhere. Then she begged me to take over her apartment, insofar as she was leaving the city and wanted full closure on her way out. She said that the rent was only $200 a month and that she had already paid for the coming month. She added that the apartment, which was on the northwest corner of 9th Street and Avenue C, was a nice 5-room, non-railroad flat. She pleaded me for the $200 and added that the landlord didn't care who lived there as long as he got the rent on time. She seemed frantic to get going on her way. I figured that I was getting lucky, because getting one's own apartment in the city is so difficult to do that some people put up with being other people's roommate for decades. So I gave her the money, which left me with only $6. As she rushed back to her misfiring car, I asked her about the apartment door key. She hurried back and said, "Oh yeah, here it is. The key deposit was $6. If you have it, I'd like it, but if you don't, it's okay." I dished out my last money to her, and off she went. I never saw Susan again. I walked the few blocks to my new phase of life. The apartment was on the southwest corner of the 3rd floor, facing 9th Street and the building next door toward Avenue B. It was totally empty, and very dirty, with animal hair caked several inches thick around all the edges. Inside, the door extended a hallway that terminated in the living room, which faced the building next door. About halfway down that hall was a skinny bedroom on the left, which faced 9th Street. Once in the living room, there was the master bedroom to the left, so it too faced 9th Street. I noted that the skinny bedroom had a strange feel to it, one that made me not want to enter it. That fact, plus the fact that the other bedroom was larger, caused me to select the latter one as my personal bedroom, at least until I could thoroughly clean the whole place. That night, I put my sleeping bag on the center of my bedroom floor and crawled into it with my feet toward the door and my head toward the curtainless windows facing 9th Street. A bit of light came in, but soon I got to sleep, happy to have a place to myself at last. At some point during the night, I awakened and felt the same strangeness that I'd earlier felt when I had peered into the skinny bedroom, which was now on the other side of the wall to my right. At first, everything looked normal, though. But a moment later, I saw black smoke coming through the entire length of that wall's upper edge, right up by the ceiling. Naturally, I suspected that a fire ensued, but I smelled, heard, and saw nothing else that indicated such. I stared at the slowly rolling smoke for a few seconds, trying to figure it out. It just kept creeping in, although there was no opening through which it could pass. Having already experienced plenty of strange occurrences so far in my life, I thought, okay, what is it this time? The thought brought on a certain level of fear, and a sudden desire to get up and get out of the apartment. By now, I was wide awake, and started to unzip my bag, while keeping my eye on the smoke. Before I even got my bag unzipped enough to get out of it, The incoming movement of the smoke sped up considerably and began to stretch toward the bedroom door. So I stopped moving, and the smoke resumed its slower motion through the wall, and was getting rather thick by now, and had reached across my ceiling about 2 feet. As I lay there watching it, it started lowering down towards me. Again I thought about escaping through my door, but without even making a move, and instantly the smoke once again hurried toward the door. The realization dawned on me that the smoke was not ordinary smoke, that it was alive and calculating. I sensed that no matter what I did, the smoke intended to come into contact with my body, and that I needed to do whatever I could to avoid that contact, as though such contact would bring about my doom. Now the black smoke was curling down toward me more rapidly than before. I considered jumping out one of the windows behind my head, although such a jump would lead to serious injury, or possibly death. It was just an experimental consideration to see what the smoke would do. It did not react by moving toward the window, as though it knew that I would not actually jump out. I thought once more about escape through the door, and the smoke quickly blocked my way for the third time. By now, it was only about 4 feet above me, and rolled down with increasing speed. I commenced with using mental methods to try to make it leave me alone. I had used to practice telepathy with friends, and so I sent it some strongly willed mental messages to back off. But it just rolled in more heavily through the wall. I then coupled my mental commands with settled confidence, and with the names of various archangels and other entities such as Buddha, Krishna, and Metatron, all of which only seemed to make the smoke more insistent to get me, whatever get me might mean. I resorted to the last holy name I could think of. I said out loud, "In the name of Jesus, the real Jesus, not some religious version of him, but the real Jesus. Go back to where you came from. Leave me now." I said all of this with will force and all the confidence that I could pull together. At first the smoke stopped moving and just hung above me, still stretching back to its point of entry along the wall. Mentally I repeated my words like a mantra, gaining more single-minded focus on them as I went. The smoke then slowly retreated and eventually disappeared the way it had come. I mentally added, "And stay out." I felt humbly victorious, like I had on other occasions when sheer will, or maybe sheer luck, or even sheer divine intervention had saved me from freaky things. I got up and looked into the skinny bedroom from where the smoke had rolled in, and saw nothing unusual. I wished that Susan was still around so that I could ask her what made her so anxious to move out, and to attain the closure that I had provided her. The smoke did not bother me again, so I pretty much forgot about it during the next few months. I cleaned the entire apartment and burned pure camphor in the skinny room. After that, the room felt fine, and I even built a loft bed in it and slept there, while renting out the master bedroom to pay my rent. Eventually, I gained employment and didn't need roommates anymore, and so again lived alone. Life was going rather well, and I made the acquaintance of a young man who turned out to be the best friend I've ever had. His name was Jimmy Spencer. Sadly, Jimmy died in a fire about 10 years later, but that is another story. Jimmy visited me regularly. I taught him a lot of things about occult philosophy, paranormal activity, and about applications of willpower. I told him about all of the weird things I had experienced since my birth, but I forgot to tell him about the black smoke. Eventually, I ran into some trouble and had to move out of the city. I hadn't paid rent the whole time, due to broken windows which went unrepaired, although I had saved all the rent money up and showed it to the scumbag landlord every time he asked for it. He having grown used to me not paying rent, he didn't notice that I had moved out, and turned the place over to Jimmy, who the landlord had already seen many times. For about 5 months, Jimmy managed to dodge any questions about me that the landlord asked him, and so my disappearance from the premises went undetected. During that time, Jimmy ran a 24-hour-a-day party every day since the day I had left. On New Year's Eve, as the year turned over to 1984, Jimmy called me on my landline in Pennsylvania at about 8 p.m. He said, "Yo, I need your help. Something really bad is happening here." Immediately, I felt the blood rush out of my face, or into it, whichever it is that happens when you realize that some evil thing is going on and it has something to do with you. I remembered the black smoke for the first time in nearly a year. I told him to tell me what's going on. I had trouble hearing him amid the noise of the party, but I made out something about people crashing in the skinny bedroom and then having a hard time with black smoke trying to pull them through the wall into the apartment next door, and that all the chicks were getting too scared to come to the party anymore. I told him that I would drive right up and deal with it. I got hold of my girlfriend, Tina, and she came along with me. About 4 hours later, right at midnight, we pulled up in front of the building. I yelled up to the window for Jimmy to drop down the key so that we could get in the door downstairs. When I knocked on the apartment door, Jimmy answered, along with my second best friend, Mike. Tina and I entered. Nobody else was there but Jimmy and Mike. I asked what happened to all of the people. Jimmy said that they had all just walked out, one after the other, just moments before we got there. Excuse me. Almost 5 months of steady party, and suddenly they had all just left? Weird. Especially weird, because of all nights to party, this was it, New Year's Eve. The sounds coming up from the street were especially loud, with lots of yelling, sirens, the steady thunder of M80s, entire mats of black cat firecrackers, bottle rockets, gunshots, and quarter sticks, the latter of which sends shockwaves through entire buildings. I know their unique sound, because I had sold plenty of them, and had also dropped quite a few out of my windows early some mornings just to wake up the neighborhood. Anyway, why everybody had just walked out moments ago, we could not figure. Better to be inside getting smashed than wandering out there in the war zone. I had arrived prepared to deal with my frightened friends, and a considerably sinister happenstance. But Jimmy and Mike seemed to have forgotten all about the actual reason why I had driven that distance on such a dangerous night to be driving at all. I felt pissed off that they acted like nothing was wrong. But I felt far more pissed off when they insisted on telling me that I just have to see inside the apartment next door. Tina and I noticed a sparkling yet glazed look in their eyes, which indicated to me that they were now tripping on LSD, which they promptly admitted. And then they both continued their excitement over my arrival, not to resolve the initial problem, but so that they could take me into the apartment next door. Like I said, this really pissed me off. I knew that whatever was bothering people in the skinny bedroom, and was scaring them away, had to do with that apartment. I also knew that Jimmy knew better than to play recklessly with such things, and he certainly knew better than to break into an apartment in the same building in which he lived, and to do all of that while innocent people are trying to have a good time right there on the premises. Tripping or not, Jimmy knew better. He was no newbie when it came to LSD. I knew damn well that he could eat a bunch of it and then go to work and function normally. Something had taken over his mind, and Mike's too, and had caused everybody else to leave at once. Something not drug-related, something black smoke-related, something had drawn them into that other apartment. Not good. I asked how the hell they got into that apartment, for getting into it would have been difficult. I had never even seen anybody go into or come out of it. The apartment always seemed to be unfrequented, and its door was like all the rest in the building, heavy steel and locked firmly into a steel frame with concrete filling. Mike laughed, though, and he said it was easy to get in. He said that he had climbed out the window in the skinny bedroom and had crawled across the outside wall and opened the first window next door and climbed in, and then had unlocked that apartment door from inside. He said that he had done this shortly after they had talked to me on the phone, and for the next several hours They had both gone in there and rummaged through all sorts of weird stuff, and had brought some of it back and stuck it in the skinny bedroom. They couldn't wait for me to look at all of it, and then to go in with them into that apartment to get more stuff. This was insane. They had been so stupid as to do all of that, to enter the very place where all of the trouble came from. Insane. And this bit about Mike having crawled across the outside wall and into that other window? Impossible. The building's exterior was not scalable. It was either stone or brick. By now I forget which, but it was overall smooth, with just mortar joints not deep enough to climb. Hell, if that were possible, I would have tried to do it on my first night there in order to escape the black smoke myself. How Mike had done this, even he couldn't say. He just said that he did it, and that he'd had no trouble holding on while somehow raising the other window and climbing into it. Needless to say, I felt increasingly uneasy about the whole affair, and felt convinced that some sort of terrible spell had come over not only them, but over the entire scene. And now there was all this stuff that they had brought from that apartment into the very one where we now stood. Some part of whatever evil inhabited that other apartment was now definitely in mine. Yes, mine. No longer Jimmy's, I figured. Mine, damn it. This was now my problem. For Jimmy and Mike were mentally gone. And there was poor Tina, who had never even been to the city before, depending entirely upon me for her safety. Hell, at this point, she would have been better off outside. I was burning with anger, excuse me again, and trying not to tremble with fear. I drew on my will to confidently manage the situation, although I had no plan how I would do it, not with all of these new developments in place. I had to do something, though, for nobody else would, or even could. The thing is, well, this thing, whatever it was, had messed with me in the past, and I had won. But it was back now that I had moved out, and now it was messing with my friends, and it had messed with theirs. It was all up to me, and we couldn't just walk away from it. Not now that they had stolen all that stuff from next door. I looked at the stuff they had stolen. Sure enough, it was as weird as they'd said it was. A pair of full-length, heavily padded pants that were too skinny for anybody of adult height to get on. 3 different parfait glasses that were made so long ago that the glass of each contained air bubbles. A few old canes that looked like they were hand-carved out of some wicked tree that stood in a haunted woods. A few cast-iron articles that fit together in a sort of incense burner that seemed to be straight out of a horror movie in which witches boil people alive. There were other items that I cannot recall. None of them looked or felt normal. They all had the same feel about them. A creepy one, better yet, a dark feeling. Like they shouldn't be touched by human hands. I said that we had to get these things back into the apartment next door and then get out of the building. But Jimmy and Mike refused to do anything but to show me all of the rest of the stuff over there in that apartment. They seemed unable to even engage in any conversation other than that. Like they were absolutely drawn over to that other apartment, and they were dead set on getting me in there too. This is all wrong, and it's not going to end well, I thought. This is not going to end well at all. I argued with the two of them for a while. We then calmed down a bit, and Jimmy showed me a lot of other stuff he had been collecting from dumpsters and from junk-filled vacant lots. He had boxfuls of costume jewelry, and gadgets and trinkets of all sorts, and artifacts made of gold and silver and ivory, a bag full of fabric, one side of which was purple fur about 3 inches long, and an assortment of acrylic paints, and some cardboard New Year's party hats. All 4 of us settled into making what we called magic hats out of the party hats. We each selected the things we wanted to adorn ours, and we painted them all up really cool. I fashioned papier-mâché corkscrew upwardly curved horns and glued them to the sides of my now black and gold colored hat, and glued some of the purple fur to its top. Jimmy's hat ended up having little saloon door tabs on its front that, when opened, revealed a small photo of two girls kissing each other. Mike's hat ended up pink and black, and he said that it would attract girls to him. Tina remained working on hers for quite a while longer. While she remained content with her endeavor, again Jimmy and Mike took up their former line of talk, demanding that now is the time to go next door. All the while I had been focusing on what to do about the situation, hoping that I would come up with a plan while making my magic hat. But I had not come up with any plan other than to open that door next to our own, throw the stolen stuff inside, and all of us leave the building. But now it seemed like nobody was going to agree with me. Tina just kept on silently working on her hat. Speaking of hats, it was the custom back then for some young guys to wear cool hats when roaming the streets. Jimmy and I both had hats that we'd found, and I had worn mine that night. Jimmy had his on the entire time we were talking. It was black felt and similar in shape to a fedora, like gangsters used to wear during the Prohibition era. I wore mine too. It was felt like Jimmy's, but was tan-colored and had a broader brim than his. Why I mention the hats on our heads, well, especially my own, will become clear in a moment. But for now, I will add that my party hat, now turned magic hat, ended up looking like one that a magician would wear in some bygone era when the difference between good and evil was indistinct. This matched my character quite well, for the result of every divination reading that I'd ever had done, whether tarot cards, palmistry, handwriting analysis, or astrological chart, involved me being a magician. And I'd always in one way or another walked a fine line between good and evil, carrying goodness in my heart and striving to destroy evil, but continually finding myself in the midst of the latter. Tonight was no different. Now, while we were making our magic hats, and I was trying to devise a plan, Mike and Jimmy filled me in on what had been happening that had drawn me to drive there from Pennsylvania. In short, people would get drunk or whatever, and would go into the skinny bedroom to crash. Then while they would be sleeping, they would have nightmares about black smoke coming through the wall that separates my apartment from the one next door. The smoke would form the shape of a hand, which would wrap around them and try to pull them through the wall. Either that, or they would wake up suddenly and see the same thing happening, while their bodies were jammed up against the wall, and they would have to struggle to pull away from it, and to get out of the hand-shaped black smoke's grasp. Either way, three things were common to every account. The black smoke forming a big hand, the hand wrapping tightly around their bodies, and it trying to pull them through the wall into the apartment next door. Jimmy said that some of the girls who had experienced it came out of the room screaming, and that some of the guys had come out crying. He said that overall, it had been scaring people away and ruining the party. Ruining the party? The party? To hell with the party. I didn't give a damn about their ruined party. This was some really terrible shit, and it pissed me off all over again. This time, though, not at Jimmy and Mike, but at the thing which dared to come back and now mess with my friends after I had moved out. Wearing my felt hat, I finally joined Mike for a trek next door, just to get the two of them to stop pestering me about going in there. I said, just for a minute, and then we're returning the stolen stuff and getting the hell out. Mike agreed. Because Mike said that the apartment next door was totally dark inside, with no visible light switches due to all the stuff in there. Excuse me. We each lit and carried a short white candle, the kind bought by the boxful at local Caribbean stores for votive purposes. He entered the dark apartment first. I hadn't suspected that the door hinges were spring-loaded, and therefore didn't expect it to swing closed as I tried to enter. The door hit me smack in the face, causing me to back up. My hat fell off and the door latched shut. I bent down to retrieve my hat, but it had somehow got stuck under the door. There was a marble slab under the door, which separated the hallway floor from the apartment floor. The marble piece was about half an inch high, and the distance between it and the bottom of the door was only about a half inch. But my hat had stuck halfway out from under that door, smashed flat. I pushed open the door a bit, and it took some effort to pull my hat from under it. I popped it back into shape and put it back on my head, and I went on inside. Light from the hallway shined in as I entered. Mike was not in sight. It was hard to figure where he'd got to so quickly. More hard to figure, though, was how all the stuff that I saw in there stayed in its position. The entire place was packed almost full, with only a tunnel through it. And I mean a tunnel, for things even arched across the ceiling, To get through, you had to just stoop over and to make sure not to touch anything, for it all might come tumbling down on top of you. It looked like everything loosely interlocked with everything else, so that disturbing any one item would make the whole arrangement fall apart. It all gave the appearance of defying the laws of nature. I got only a glimpse of this scene as I closed the door behind me. I held the candle down low so that I could see exactly where to step first, and now something else hit me in the face, but didn't knock off my hat. I hadn't seen it coming, for it turned out to be a small, wood-framed glass door attached to a sort of hutch that stood just to the left of me. I have no idea what made it open just then. I pushed it closed and noticed that even this hutch-like piece of furniture looked really old and had a weird design that made me think of haunted houses. It was full of disturbing-looking objects, although I could not make them out very well. They just reminded me of shapes that I had thought I'd seen bushes take when I have walked alone in woods at night. I called for Mike. He answered, "Just come on in. You have to walk straight ahead and follow the tunnel to the right. Come on back here. You have to see all this cool stuff." I refused. "No, Mike, let's go now. I've already seen enough. We can't stay in here." But he wouldn't come, so I went on through the tunnel of stuff. Everything cast shadows due to the meager light that my candle created, and it appeared to me that all sorts of things poked toward the center of the passage in such a manner that it looked easier to get in than to get back out. Like even though the going in was difficult, it was easy going when compared to trying to go the other direction. I noted the effect, for I hoped that any second now Mike and I would be heading for the door. About 10 feet further in, I rounded the turn to the right, the only way through. This was an entire apartment apparently full of creepy stuff, so that the only way to enter was the one way Mike had gone. And this was in the direction of whatever room it was that bordered my skinny bedroom next door, and of course in the direction of the window into which Mike had mysteriously entered in the first place. As I turned right, I heard a noise to my left, through all of the stuff. Something was crawling through it, maybe about 20 feet away. Something bigger than a rat or a cat. At least it seemed so by the sound of it. It seemed like something about the size of a medium-weight dog. I called out, "Mike, hurry up. Something's in here, and we have to get out right now." "Yeah, I know," he drawled out, suddenly sounding like a junkie about to go into full nod. "It's okay. Just come on back here. It's really cool." Yeah, right. Just like I thought to myself earlier, I now thought again. Any second now, and this isn't going to end well. I have to get him out of here. He's not in his right mind. This isn't even the acid that's talking. This whole thing is just plain bad. After my right turn, I stepped a few feet ahead and now saw before me a significant change of environment. The passage opened up a good bit, and I could stand upright and walk more freely, for the floor was now clear of objects. I noticed that I stood in a small circle of nothing but open floor space. A circle. Somehow the idea of a circle bothered me. I thought of covens and seances. The room into which I had just entered had no actual doorway, although it was clearly a skinny room, just like the one next door in my own apartment. Of course, straight ahead of me was the wall through which had come the black smoke hand that had reached through from this side and tried to pull people back through it from the other side. That same wall now was in front of me, about 6 feet away. A dresser stood in front of it, a very old dresser, one that had a large wood-framed mirror rising from its rear side. The reflective silver nitrate coating on the back of the mirror had cracked from age, and in the dim candlelight made my reflection look eerily fractured. I stared at it for a moment, unable to think clearly about it. I felt like something deep inside me fractured like my reflection, and I also had the feeling that I was looking into something that was more than a mirror, more like a window through which stood pieces of myself looking back at me. Mike had stood his candle on the dresser, excuse me, and was crawling high up to my right, on top of a pile of boxes full of whatever they contained. It looked like he should not be able to be up there, like everything instead should be tumbling down. But he managed to stay up there, pulling one thing after another out of the boxes. He rooted around, he rooted around like he wasn't sure what he was doing, but like he couldn't stop doing whatever it was. Between the dresser and I, a small bed rested on the floor. The head end of it pointed left toward the window into which Mike had entered, and obviously had then climbed over a lot of stuff to get into the open circle where I now stood at the bedside. The bed was only about 2.5 feet wide, by maybe 4 feet long, although it was not a crib. It was an actual bed, and it was freshly made with a clean white sheet tucked in all the way around. A small pillow lay at the left end, wrapped in a small, clean white pillowcase. The sheet and the pillowcase were the only things in sight that were clean. I noticed that no light shone in through the window, although there was nothing covering it. I also noticed that no sound came in from the street below. I furthermore noted that the room felt completely still and serene, even soothing, despite the disturbing mirror reflection in front of me, and despite all the rest. I suddenly felt sleepy, just as Mike slowly mumbled, "It makes you just want to lie down on the bed and go to sleep, doesn't it?" Yes, it does. And that's why we have to get out of here right now. Come on, Mike. We don't have time to fool around here. Get down, get your candle, and let's go. Something's coming, and it's not safe in here. No, he droned. I'm going to stay here and see what else I can find to keep. You just go on ahead. I'll come later. I couldn't change his mind, so I decided that I had to leave him there. I'd be damned if I were going to stay there any longer. There was Jimmy and my girlfriend Tina next door waiting for us, and now Mike in here not sticking to our agreement. I chose to go be with the living, for in my mind right then, Mike was about as good as dead. I said, "Okay, I'm leaving. Get the hell down from there, and no matter what, do not leave your candles sitting there to catch the whole building on fire." I turned around and stepped into the tunnel of stuff again. As I rounded to the left turn toward the door, I could again hear what was creeping around through all of the stuff, louder now, closer. I hurried on, stepping over things, bending around other things, and ducking under yet other things, seemingly fighting my way through a maze of objects much older than I, and of forces much older than even those. I exited holding my hat onto my head with one hand, and holding my candle with my other hand, nearly thrusting myself into the hallway. The door slammed closed behind me, leaving Mike alone in there, except for whatever was coming after him. Tina was still working on her magic hat. She smiled at me and asked how it went. Jimmy, however, got all riled up at me for leaving Mike alone next door. We argued about it for quite a while. He said that I was responsible for Mike and that I had to go back after him. I counter-argued that I'd done my share, and that if anybody is going back for Mike, it would have to be Jimmy, for I was not the one to get us into this mess in the first place. Our argument continued, with each of us making good points and sticking firmly to them, until we heard something that was impossible to hear. Impossible because we heard it through all the layers of brick and plaster separating my living room from the apartment next door. I had never even heard any of my neighbors in their apartments the whole time I had lived there, even though one of them was known to get pretty loud at times. From my living room, we heard Mike next door repeatedly mumbling, "Stop bothering me. Just leave me alone. I just want to go to sleep. Leave me alone." This ended our argument for the time being. Tina, Jimmy, and I just stood there, transfixed. Mike's quietly moaned pleas shook us deeply, to the core. We could not imagine what was going on with Mike, but we knew that he was in some pretty deep shit. Then Jimmy swore at me for the first time in his life for leaving Mike in there like that. I felt really bad, but I still refused to go back next door. Then we heard the window next door fly up, like somebody opened it with vengeance. Then we heard Mike groan, and then some shuffling around in a struggle, and then we heard a body thunk on the sidewalk below. This sounded horrible. It sounded like somebody's head had just now cracked wide open. We went to one of the windows in the master bedroom, opened it, and looked down below. Strange. There was no sound coming from the entire block. Nobody was out there at all. Nobody laid on the sidewalk. The entire coast was clear. It was the first time I had ever seen absolutely nobody out there at all. Then we heard the window next door slam shut. The three of us were lost in our own solemn thoughts. Then we heard Mike again, but not through the walls this time. We heard him from down on the street, calling up to us to throw down the key so that he could get in the building. His voice was normal now. "Yo, Turk! Jimmy! It's Mike! It's me, Mike! Throw down the key!" We looked out the window again, but still nobody was down there. I said that his physical body must be on that little bed, and his astral body is what we somehow were made privy of hearing getting tossed out the window. And now just as mysteriously we're hearing calling to us, for he doesn't realize that perhaps he's dead. I told Jimmy that all we can do is wait, for I had already taught Mike that if he ever finds himself in such a situation, all he has to do to get somewhere is to will it. I said that he'd figure it out sooner or later, and when he does, he'll just fly up to his body or to wherever he wants to go. You should have seen Tina look at me when I said all of that. Jimmy, however, just nodded. Soon Mike stopped asking for the key, and we estimated that he'd figured out what had happened. Reluctantly, Jimmy lit a white candle and went into the apartment next door. Now he was gone for at least a half an hour. Tina and I waited. We waited so long that we both felt sick in the stomach. I didn't want to have to go after both Jimmy and Mike now. But I was about ready to do it when finally Jimmy entered from the hallway, nearly carrying Mike. Jimmy looked worn out, and Mike looked just about dead. Mike couldn't talk for another half hour or so. His face was severely swollen and bruised, and both of his eyes were almost closed. The left side of his body was soaking wet, while the right side of his body was completely dry. Black and red candle wax was dripped all over him. Neither of them had Mike's white candle. Jimmy had only his own. Jimmy said that he'd found Mike on the little bed, with the little pillow covering his face, and that Mike had not been breathing. Jimmy said nothing about any creature. He only commented that Mike's candle had burned all the way down and was about to ignite the dresser, so he had put out the flame just at the right time. Eventually, Mike's consciousness came back a bit toward normal, and I asked him what happened in there after I'd left. He said that he had climbed it down to leave, but that instead he had laid face down on the bed to get some sleep. And then some animal had got up on the bed and was walking around his head. He said that he couldn't move, but that he could see that the animal had hairy hooves instead of paws or feet. He said it wouldn't leave him alone, and so he had told it over and over to just let him sleep. Then I asked him what happened to his face. He replied, "Oh yeah." Then it threw me out the window, and I landed on my face. Didn't you hear me yelling up for you to throw down the key? How did you finally get upstairs again? I asked him. Well, he said, I remembered what you told me. I just flew on up and got back in my body, and then Jimmy came and got me. How did you get all of this red and black wax all over you, and what about this water on your left side? I don't know, he answered. I was asleep for all of that, I guess. Then he looked at me, as though asking a question, but while speaking quite affirmatively. You know, there is the good, and there is the bad, and then there is the evil. That's what he said. I walked past my skinny bedroom and faced my wall a few feet inside my apartment door, so that on the other side of the wall would be the skinny room next door. I pressed my hands to the wall and placed my forehead against it too. I cleared my mind and then did some good old mental telepathy. I mentally summoned the thing, whether that thing is black smoke or some hooved creature from hell, to the other side of the wall. When I felt that I had its attention, and that it was right there with its own head just on the other side of the plaster and the bricks, I sent it a message. You fucked with me my first night here. I beat you. Now you have fucked with my friends. You must pay for that. We're going to open your door one more time and throw in some things. And once we close the door, you will go to bed, and you will go to sleep forever. You will never again bother anybody in this world. Your time here is finished. Do you understand? I felt a faint mental whimper coming back at me. Mike, Jimmy, and I dug into a bag full of carved stones that Jimmy had found somewhere. Each one was shaped like an Egyptian scarab. The bag contained hundreds of them. They were in 3 colors, red, pink, and blue. We each gathered together one of each color. I held the 9 of them in my hand and uttered a few phrases to clear them of all past karma. Then I uttered a few more to give them a fresh purpose, that is, to send that creature to bed and to sleep forever. Then the 3 of us took our 3 colors in our hands and walked into the hallway and opened the door of the apartment next door. On the count of 3, we all threw our scarabs as hard as we could into the darkness inside. We heard them rattling against all the stuff in there, and one by one, they all landed on the floor at our feet outside the door. Rejected. I said, "Oh, no, you don't. That's not how this ends. Not this time." So we threw them in again. And again we heard them shuffle down through all of the stuff. This time they stayed in there. We closed the door and never opened it again. No more black smoke. No more nightmares. No more any such thing ever happened. A couple of years later, I heard that workers came in and emptied out that apartment next door. And while they were doing it, nobody noticed anything odd at all. Mike, Jimmy, and I, we each kept a stolen parfait glass for ourselves. Mike's broke to pieces while standing on a shelf. Jimmy's rolled off a counter and shattered on the floor. Then Mike died of AIDS. My parfait glass lasted a few more years, and finally fractured like the reflective silver nitrate backing on that mirror while standing on my porch in Pennsylvania. And like I said, Jimmy died in a fire. I ran into Tina a few years ago. She remembered it all, just like I now told it. I still have a photo of me wearing my magic hat while standing in front of a mirror and reaching a hand toward the camera. Under it is a caption that Jimmy had made up. The illusion is real. Jimmy also wrote a poem about the whole thing. It has no name and is just one word. Damn.